Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Iran and the Bush administration. Groundhog Day for the U.S. media. Party time in Pyongyang, a dictator's birthday, North Korean style. The media's loss is the conspiracy theorists' gain, a look at 9/11 and belief. Plus, the man whose genius often gets lost under the sofa. Welcome back to The Listening Post. They say that history repeats itself, but it usually takes a lot longer than this. Take a listen to what the White House and the U.S. military are saying about Iran these days. It sounds familiar. So too does the coverage that's getting. That's the subject of our news divide this week. Is Iran the new Iraq? And will the U.S. media, which have apologized for the poor job they did pre-Iraq, be any more critical of the White House this time around?
Every party involved seems to be engaged in a war of words.
It's a war of words, all right, one we've heard before. Keith Olbermann's Countdown airs on MSNBC in the U.S.
Consider the similarities between the phrases Mr. Bush uses now about Iran and the ones he used in 2002 about Iraq.
The Iraqi people cannot flourish under a dictator that oppresses them, threatens them. Our struggle is not with the Iranian people. As a matter of fact, we want them to flourish. Iraq is a land rich in culture, and resources, and talent. And the Iranian people are proud people, and they've got a great history and a great tradition. If we fail to act in the face of danger, the people of Iraq will continue to live in brutal submission. The regime will remain unstable. The region will remain unstable with little hope of freedom and isolated from the progress of our times. And one of the things that the Iranian government has done is they've begun to isolate their nation to the harm of the Iranian people. Hopefully this can be done peacefully. I believe we can solve our problems peacefully. All options are on the table. All options are on the table.
Olbermann's point, we, the media, won't get fooled again.
The idea that somehow we're manufacturing the idea that the Iranians are providing IEDs is preposterous. Does this mean you're trying to have a pretext for war? No, it means I'm trying to protect our troops.
Make no mistake, there is a media offensive underway against Iran, and it starts in Washington. The BBC reported this past week that U.S. officials leaked details of what an American attack on Iran would look like.
Should the order ever be given for a US attack on Iran, it's been revealed that it would come in the form of airstrikes, not just on its known nuclear sites, but on the country's entire military infrastructure.
The BBC report also said that an attack could be provoked not by Iran's nuclear plans, but by events in Iraq.
The trigger, however, for military action could be a major attack on US forces in Iraq if it were traced to Tehran, or a perceived nuclear threat.
Establishing that link between Iran and American casualties in Iraq is central to the U.S. media strategy. But as was pointed out again on MSNBC, that story ignores one key fact.
Most of the casualties that U.S. troops have incurred, however, come not from the Shia backed by Iran, but from Sunnis who are backed by Jordanians, who are backed by Saudis. So he gets to come out and say something that is true, but he presents it in a misleading fashion to suggest that most of the casualties our troops are incurring are coming from these dastardly Iranians, when the exact opposite is the case.
On February 11th, the American military briefed reporters in Baghdad. That's where these pictures come from. They claimed weapons used to kill U.S. soldiers in Iraq could be traced directly to Iran. But the ground rules for the briefing meant reporters could not reveal the sources of the information. Media watchdogs argued that news organizations who agreed to those rules are being manipulated by the Bush administration again.
The U.S. journalism magazine editor and publisher wrote of the New York Times. Its editorial page announced that claims of Iran supplying weapons killing American troops were overplayed. But the Times' own reporters were guilty of overhyping, said editor and publisher, first in a February 10th front page exclusive by Michael R. Gordon, then in a February 12th front pager by James Glanz, who both attended the briefing by 3 anonymous sources in Baghdad. Eason Jordan writing on his website, IraqSlogger.com. Why are U.S. officials hiding behind the cloak of anonymity? After the bogus Iraq evidence debacle, allegations that led to war, tens of thousands of lives lost, only a fool would accept as gospel supposed evidence presented by officials making allegations anonymously.
Arab news media see the story differently. Saudi television focused on Iran's continued refusal to back down on its nuclear program. Kuwaiti TV examined the energy angle, predicting the U.S. won't get much support against Iran in Europe, since European governments currently dependent on Russian oil and gas see Iran as a real alternative. Abu Dhabi TV reported on talks between Iran and Syria, saying the Arab world won't fall into the trap of being divided, religiously and ethnically, as Washington might like. The U.S. media push against Iran comes at a time when some American news organizations are taking a long look at their performance on the Iraq story. Frontline, a documentary show on the U.S.'s public broadcasting system, just aired a comprehensive examination of how the U.S. media bought into the Bush administration's Iraq plan.
No terrorist state poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people than the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
A al-Qaeda-type network trained and armed by Saddam could attack America and leave not one fingerprint.
We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
The way that the press was sold and spun and turned around and just fooled by the White House in the run-up to the war represents more than just a missed story. How can one say that we have a watchdog press after a performance like that?
The answer is you can't. But with Iran now on America's radar, the U.S. media has a chance to report that story, get it right, and begin to repair its reputation.
Our Global Village Voices now with their views on how the media cover the story.
From Cairo comes one of our more animated contributors, a vlogger who doesn't want to show his face, but who tells us his cartoon colleague speaks for both of them.
Do I think George Bush is trying to spin a war on Iran in his recent speeches? Well, first of all, I'm not a fan of Iran's current regime, but neither am I a fan of war or children dying. These poor children, they don't even make it to college, and they join the US military, die in vain. Breaks my heart. But yes, Bush is doing the same thing he did in 2002 and early 2003, selling an attack on a country by linking it to violence in some other place. He did the whole song and dance about Saddam's link to violence in Afghanistan, and now it's all about Iran's link to violence in Iraq. Will he link Democrats to violence in Wisteria Lane into the 2008 elections? Not unlikely. And no, we do not watch that show here in Egypt.